Professor Fergus Farnsworth lived in a dilapidated wooden house on the outskirts of town, its crooked chimney and squeaky porch announcing that its occupant was, at best, a very peculiar character. Every window of his home glowed with an uneven hue, as if at any moment something might combust within those walls, and often it did. Fergus prided himself on being a genius inventor, though that opinion was not exactly shared by his long-suffering neighbors. He wore thick spectacles, constantly sliding down his nose, and sported a goatee full of singed hairs from his frequent experiments that literally blew up in his face. Yet, with unflappable confidence, he believed he was on the brink of revolutionizing daily life in the small town of Copperstream. If only his contraptions would comply before they inevitably sputtered, sparked, and soared into chaos. Early each morning, Fergus woke to a self-chiming alarm clock of his own design, wondrously named the Super Staccato Sunrise 3000. It was intended to simulate an orchestra of roosters at daybreak, guaranteed to ease him into alertness at precisely 6:03 a.m. Instead, it produced such a terrifying cacophony that it sent the local crows racing for the horizon and catapulted Fergus from his bed as though ejected from a slingshot. He'd claw his way off the floorboards, hair frizzed in every direction, then stagger toward the contraption to silence the chaos. The device, with its nest of wires and tin horns, would smoke ominously, as if it were proud of completing its daily ritual of startling its inventor half to death. Once awake, Fergus would slip into his workshop to finalize that day's ideas. The workshop was stuffed to the rafters with incomplete prototypes. Mechanical footwear that squeaked out marching band tunes, pocket telescopes that only displayed upside-down images, and half-assembled robotic arms that waved cheerfully whenever someone sneezed. Each surface was riddled with coffee stains, scorched edges, and scribbled notes. Fergus's typical morning routine involved tripping over some untested gizmo, like the self-sweeping broom that once tried to sweep him out the door. If neighbors heard a sudden crash and a shriek, they merely nodded in understanding. Professor Farnsworth was at it again. Despite his history of fiascos, Fergus never lost hope or his zest for tinkering. On a bright Tuesday, he was rummaging through a pile of scrap metal, rummaging for an elusive doohickey. "Where did I put that sprocket with the triple gear extension?" he muttered. Suddenly, an old contraption labeled Spectacular Spaghetti Maker, faulty, clattered off the shelf. It landed with a clank next to his feet, blinking its green LED eyes. Fergus froze. He remembered too well how, in a previous demonstration, this invention had once turned piping hot noodles into gluey ropes that lashed out at unsuspecting bystanders. With exaggerated caution, he nudged it with his foot, and when nothing catastrophic happened, pressed on into the day with a relieved sigh. That particular Tuesday brought an unexpected visitor, the local mail carrier, a sprightly woman named Beatrice. She knocked tentatively, bracing herself in case the door opened to a chorus of explosions. When Fergus peered out, hair still sporting bits of wire and grease, she thrust a letter into his hand. "From the mayor," she said, eyeing the strange contraptions behind him with a nervous smile. Fergus tore open the envelope, reading the embossed words inside. It was an invitation, no, a summons, to demonstrate his latest invention at the prestigious Copperstream Community Expo. This was a big deal. Merchants, dignitaries, and even a few journalists from neighboring counties would attend. He felt a rush of excitement mingle with a jolt of anxiety. After all, it wasn't every day that an opportunity so grand came knocking. He just had to ensure nothing malfunctioned, which, given his track record, was a tall order. The next week, Fergus worked tirelessly, ignoring meal times and sometimes forgetting to sleep. He decided that his flagship invention for the expo would be the newly refined Multitask Master 500, a device that promised to slice vegetables, polish floors, and even fold laundry using mechanical arms and specialized attachments. He pictured crowds marveling at his brilliance, newspapers praising the unstoppable mind of Professor Farnsworth. He tested the contraption day in and day out, fine-tuning each gear, valve, and servo to perfect the synchronous dance of housekeeping tasks. By the night before the expo, it seemed unwaveringly reliable. No strange engine coughs, no sparks. The arms were folding, polishing, and slicing in perfect formation, each action graceful enough to rival a ballet performance. On the morning of the expo, the town's central plaza was alive with color. Booths lined the streets selling handcrafted trinkets, fruit preserves, and all manner of homemade pies. Children scampered about, squealing in delight at the puppet shows and small carnival rides. A brass band played jaunty tunes, and the air shimmered with anticipation. Fergus arrived pushing a cart with the Multitask Master 500 concealed under a large sheet. His boots clacked on the cobblestones, and though sweat beaded on his forehead, he could practically taste triumph. He was determined that, for once, everything would go precisely as planned. He found his assigned corner of the plaza, where a modest stage awaited. With trembling hands, he removed the sheet to reveal the device, drawing a small cluster of curious onlookers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice quivering with excitement, "I present to you the Multitask Master 500. This is no mere household helper, it's a revolutionary leap forward in mechanical convenience, capable of performing several domestic chores simultaneously." The watchers clapped politely, and he suspected some recognized him as that guy whose gadgets tend to blow up at farmers markets, but he pressed on. He flicked the machine's starter switch, and it came to life with a gentle hum. The mechanical arms extended outward gracefully. First, Fergus fed it a carrot to peel and slice. The Multitask Master 500 complied flawlessly, neat carrot slices falling into a bowl. There were murmurs of approval. Next, one arm grabbed a dish rag and began polishing the stage floor. Another arm snatched a rumpled shirt from a basket and folded it with crisp precision. Murmurs grew to impressed gasps. This was going well. Fergus beamed, gesturing toward the device like a ringmaster proud of his star performer. Just as he was about to invite a volunteer to step forward for further demonstration, a small, critical gear deep inside the Multitask Master 500 began to slip. With a faint clunk, one of its arms jerked unnaturally, the carrot peeler attachment still engaged. A moment later, the entire apparatus shuddered. Fergus sensed trouble and hurried to switch it off, but the control panel was jammed. The machine whirred, beeped, and began spinning around like a delirious top. The dish rag arm, still in polishing mode, collided with the shirt folding arm, sending the newly folded laundry flying into the crowd. The carrot slicing blade whizzed around, harmless but terrifying enough to send spectators scuttling behind booths. "Stay calm, everyone!" Fergus shouted as he ducked under a swinging arm that nearly smacked him in the side of the head. The device careened off the stage, taking the tablecloth with it, scattering plates and cutlery in every direction. In the resulting panic, folks hopped onto chairs, steered children to safety, and hollered in confusion. Fergus lunged for the emergency power switch at the base, but the flailing machine knocked him onto his backside before he could reach it. Amid the clamor, a resourceful bystander, a blacksmith, named Greta, charged forward wielding a thick iron rod, hooking it around one of the machine's arms to slow its spinning rampage. With that opening, Fergus scrambled on his knees to the console. He managed to yank loose the main power cable, and with a final sputter, the Multitask Master 500 clanged to a halt. Silence descended, except for the heavy breathing of the crowd. Then came the laughter, some gentle, some uproarious, followed by a wave of applause. No one was seriously hurt, and the comedic spectacle seemed to have bested any ill feelings. But the mayor, who had been splattered with stray carrot peels, approached Fergus with a forced grin that was somewhere between amusement and exasperation. Fergus bowed apologetically, certain that this demonstration would be talked about for years. After the expo fiasco, Fergus returned home, crestfallen but not defeated. He was convinced the malfunction was a fluke, a mere oversight. After all, he was on the cusp of greatness. He could feel it. If he could correct this one mechanical hiccup, he would surely secure that elusive success. Yet the next day brought a fresh wind of disaster. Fergus rummaged through his workshop for a project to restore his reputation, eventually unearthing a half-finished robotic vacuum called the Dustbuster Delightan, an earlier model with comical design flaws. It ran on a complicated system of coded beeps and whirs, with a single camera eye that might or might not have recognized obstacles. He spent hours giving the device a serious upgrade, determined that it was the answer he needed. His plan, to offer free demonstrations at the local community center, showing how seamlessly the new Dustbuster Delight V2 navigated hallways, vacuumed up debris, and politely avoided ankles. Perhaps the contraption's quiet efficiency would overshadow the fiasco of the previous day. Once he was satisfied with the modifications, Fergus nestled the vacuum in the back of his wagon, carefully drove to the community center, and set up a demonstration in the main foyer. Eager onlookers, especially the local librarians who despise dusty corners, gathered around. "Ladies and gentlemen," Fergus intoned with renewed optimism, "behold an invention that will change the very foundation of cleanliness." He pressed the activation button. The Dustbuster Delight V2 beeped, swerved in a neat arc, and began to suck up invisible dust from the tiled floor. "You see," Fergus explained, following it with confident steps, "it uses state-of-the-art sensors to circumvent humans and furniture, ensuring minimal disruptions." The little vacuum whirred busily, gliding under a table, around several potted plants, and between two elderly patrons with remarkable grace. But as soon as Fergus reached for a glass of water on a nearby tray, an ominous series of beeps erupted from the vacuum. Like it had just been startled, the device spun 180 degrees and zoomed toward the potted plants. The librarians gasped. Inside the vacuum, a mechanism jammed, intensifying the suction power. Suddenly, the vacuum latched onto one of the planters. Soil flew everywhere. The potted fern was slurped halfway into the vacuum's intake tube, leaves fluttering like a frantic green flag. The librarian shouted, while Fergus, eyes wide, lunged to flip the emergency release. The vacuum suction reversed with an angry hiss, spitting dirt, roots, and pebbles across the pristine tile. A huge cloud of potting mix mushroomed upward, covering everyone. When the dust settled, the librarian's expressions were sheeted in brown grime. Fergus offered a weak smile before he was summarily guided, perhaps escorted is the better term, out the door. Inside his chaotic workshop that evening, Fergus stood amid the wreckage of half-finished contraptions. He coughed on swirling dust motes, shaking his head at the memory of the librarians' dismayed faces. "I promise," he muttered to nobody in particular, "tomorrow will be the day it all works out. I just need to think of something foolproof." But as many times as he dared to utter those words, the cosmos seemed determined to prove him wrong. What happened next began as a small rumor. Word spread that a local carnival group passing through needed someone to maintain their rides. A Ferris wheel motor had been acting up, and they required mechanical expertise. The carnival was due in Copperstream that coming weekend. Surely, Fergus thought, if he could fix something so grandiose yet straightforward, everyone would see him in a new light. A Ferris wheel was, at its heart, simpler than a multi-purpose domestic robot. He jumped at the chance, visiting the carnival during its setup phase, armed with tools and brimming with confidence. At the fairgrounds, cheerful lights and vibrant tents greeted him. He was led to the gargantuan Ferris wheel, paint chipped in places, bolts rusted. "It gets stuck at the top sometimes," the manager explained, arms folded. Fergus tightened spindles, replaced worn gear belts, and installed a brand new motor control panel. Hours later, it gleamed in working order. Eager for a final test, he hopped into a carriage, waved to the carnival folk below, and turned the motor key. The Ferris wheel began its smooth ascent, carrying him up to an impressive vantage point. He felt a wave of exhilaration, certain that at last he'd see something function faultlessly. As it made a few rotations, everything seemed perfect. Then a faint rattling drifted through the crisp evening air. It escalated into a loud grinding noise. Below, carnival staff shouted up at Fergus, pointing to the motor's housing. Sparks flew. The new motor panel hissed and crackled, likely reacting to an incompatible wiring harness Fergus had overlooked. The Ferris wheel lurched and squealed, then halted with a jerk, naturally, at the highest point in the rotation. Lights flickered around the wheel's perimeter, and the entire contraption groaned. Fergus gulped. He was stuck in mid-air, mechanical meltdown imminent. He rummaged in his satchel for tools, carefully leaning out to see if there was a manual override. With trembling hands, he unscrewed a small panel inside the carriage, only to find that the wires had fused. Panicking, he shouted directions to the carnival staff below, hoping someone could disable the main power safely. For a tense quarter hour, Fergus dangled in the evening breeze, heart fluttering faster than hummingbird wings. Spectators gathered, worried and fascinated. At length, the carnival crew managed to cut power and hand crank the Ferris wheel, slowly bringing Fergus back down to the ground. He dragged himself from the carriage, face pale from fear and humiliation. While no one blamed him openly, the manager's polite request for immediate repairs was overshadowed by Fergus's shaky vow. "Rate me your bill. I'll do better next time. Sorry about that." He hobbled away, feeling every bit the hapless inventor. That night, as he sat in his workshop's battered swivel chair, tapping a pencil against a blueprint, Fergus sank into uncharacteristic gloom. Was it possible that his mind was simply too cluttered with ideas? Maybe the reason each invention fizzled was that he never gave them a chance to blossom fully before rushing to the next concept. He gazed around at half-glued gadgets, scribbled notes pinned to corkboards, a flurry of mechanical arms and unlabeled wires. Indeed, it was a disorganized kaleidoscope of starts, stops, and harebrained potential disasters. Slowly, he began gathering items, scrap metal in one area, microchips in another. As he cleaned, he noticed something funny. Many of his older prototypes were actually brimming with potential, if only he'd had the patience to refine them. At dawn, a beam of sunlight caught him dozing at his workbench, drooling on a new blueprint. He blinked, twitching awake, only to realize he'd fallen asleep sorting parts. Yet, instead of feeling the usual panic, he felt strangely clear-headed. Moved by a sudden clarity of purpose, he decided to pick one project and see it through with meticulous care. He sought out a humble invention from months ago, a disaster-proof gadget toolbox, an all-in-one portable kit that supposedly detected mechanical malfunctions before they could escalate. The half-completed device was a small metal suitcase, bristling with slot apertures for different sensor modules. If perfected, it would read essential data from any machine: temperature, friction, fluid levels, wire fuses, and issue an alert if something threatened to go haywire. It was ironically perfect for someone plagued with frequent malfunctions. Determined not to rush, Fergus spent the next 2 weeks assembling it piece by piece. He tested each sensor on simpler machines first. Like a battered lawnmower, the toolbox beeped warnings at the slightest sign of trouble, giving him just enough time to fix a leak or tighten a bolt. He grew more confident with every success. Finally, when he found no more flaws, he set out to prove its worth. An opportunity presented itself soon enough. The mayor's office had a brand new generator to power a public events hall, but it kept sputtering unpredictably. Concerned that it might fail during an important speech, the mayor called Fergus, albeit with cautious hesitation. Armed with a newly completed disaster-proof gadget toolbox, Fergus arrived, quietly hoping this device would, at long last, showcase his competence. He approached the generator, a squat, heavy machine humming in a metallic corner of the events hall's basement. For the first time in a long while, Fergus wasn't flustered or in a hurry. He carefully opened the toolbox, inserted the temperature sensor onto a magnetic mount, fitted a friction gauge in the motor's inspection port, and connected a fuse integrity probe to the control panel. The sensors read out on a small screen, providing a stream of data. Almost instantly, the device highlighted a spike in the temperature gauge, indicating a failing coolant pump. With that knowledge, Fergus calmly replaced the faulty part and relubricated the overheated section. "Try powering it on now," he said gently, stepping back. The mayor's assistant threw a switch and the generator hummed to life, purring steadily. Moments later, the entire hall glowed with perfectly stable electricity. No sputters, no sparks. The mayor beamed. "Splendid work, Professor Farnsworth," he exclaimed, shaking Fergus's hand. A wave of relief flooded him. He'd done something right, and more importantly, the invention had functioned just as intended. Word spread, slowly but surely, that Fergus Farnsworth had solved the generator crisis. A few local businesses asked him to test their HVAC units or check their coffee machines before they conked out mid-rush hour. Nothing extravagant, but enough for people to see him as more than just the frantic inventor with the out-of-control contraptions. Over time, Fergus refined the disaster-proof gadget toolbox further, making sure it was user-friendly and robust. When the time came for another community event, a simpler one, a local Farmers Appreciation Day, the mayor invited Fergus to conduct a demonstration of the toolbox. Fergus arrived with calm confidence, gave a short explanation, and showcased how the sensors worked on a random piece of equipment, a malfunctioning food processor. Right on cue, the toolbox beeped an alert, and with a single tweak, Fergus fixed it on the spot. The crowd applauded, genuinely impressed. While the fiascos of the past lingered in the town's collective memory, indeed folks still joked about the day laundry soared overhead like seagulls, they also started to appreciate Fergus's earnest passion and the sincere heart behind every effort. With each successful repair, Fergus felt his old confidence bloom, this time tempered by patience and attention to detail. He began to realize that success was more about the steady, measured approach than about flashy bursts of invention. If you built a strong foundation, the thing on top was far less likely to collapse. In the months that followed, Fergus's workshop gained an unexpected air of order. Tools hung on labeled hooks, projects were diligently logged in a journal, spare parts organized in color-coded bins. Gone were the days of frantic rummaging and the hair-raising leaps from one half-baked idea to the next. Of course, he continued to dream big. He remained an inventor after all. But now he tested each step before unveiling a new creation to the public. Malfunctions still happened from time to time. A small rocket-powered whisk nearly redecorated his ceiling with pancake batter. But they were more manageable, contained amusements than town-wide catastrophes. One crisp afternoon, as Fergus strolled through Copper Stream's market, a child tugged at his father's sleeve and pointed excitedly at the inventor. "That's him!" the child exclaimed. "He's the one with all the cool gadgets." The father gave a polite nod. Fergus, overhearing, gave a warm smile. He didn't mind that folks found his escapades a source of entertainment. At least they didn't duck and run at the sight of him anymore. And the next time he was invited to exhibit at a community expo, people gathered around with genuine curiosity instead of bracing themselves for possible flying carrot slices or whirling laundry. That day, in the bustling buzz of the marketplace with folks calling out friendly greetings, Fergus Farnsworth felt something he hadn't felt in a long while: contentment. He tipped his hat to passers-by, mentally crafting new ideas for inventions, ideas that he would handle with the care and attention they deserved. And though his contraptions might never be entirely free of comedic mishaps, for a genuinely creative mind is rarely without the occasional explosion or glitch, the future seemed just a bit brighter. Through it all, he had learned that malfunctions would come and go, but perseverance, patience, and a good dose of laughter could transform them into stepping stones on the path to true innovation.